Hello, good evening. Well, as you join us tonight, MPs are voting on a series of amendments to the government's Rwanda Bill. Now I'm going to start with some spoilers. None of them are going to pass. So where's the drama? Where's the jeopardy? Well, that comes from looking at the scale of the Conservative rebellion, how many of the Prime Minister's own MPs are willing to stand against him on a bill which Rishi Sunak has invested so much of his time and political capital in. What we're seeing tonight is not so much a battle over a bill, it's over the future direction of the Conservative Party and which element within it has its hand on the steering wheel. And as we come on air, we are getting breaking news coming through right now of 2 resignations already. Tonight, we'll take you through it all. It's Tuesday. I'm Sophy Ridge, live from Westminster, and this is a specially extended Politics Hub. We're going to update you on the votes in a moment. MPs currently voting on the critical amendment from Bill Cash. We'll go back there. But in the meantime, we're joined by our political editor, Beth Rigby from Central Lobby in Parliament. And Beth, we've had 2 resignations. What's happened?
Yeah, Sophie, look, there is quite a lot of jeopardy in this, even though we know these amendments won't pass. This is so uncomfortable for a Prime Minister with a party at war, and just breaking in the last few moments, Tory sources confirming to me that 2 deputy party chairmen, key figures in the Red Wall, Brendan Clark-Smith and Lee Anderson, have both resigned their posts. Why have they done it? Well, the Chief Whip made it very clear slightly earlier today in the past hour that if you backed these amendments, your position would be untenable. If you're on the payroll and you defy the Prime Minister, your position untenable. And as such, these 2 gentlemen have quit their posts within the party. But this will go down with some controversy amongst their supporters and amongst rebel MPs. There was a meeting of the 5 families of those right-wing groups in committee corridor just above my head earlier this afternoon. About 40 MPs were in there, including Suella Braverman. And a source coming out of that room, when asked whether these 2 people should be sacked over this disagreement, said it would be unfortunate, sad and deeply unhelpful for the government to lose one of its, that's Lee Anderson, most prominent representatives in the Red Wall. And I think there's some calculation now from some of those rebels that Lee Anderson cut loose, will make some quite strong interventions, perhaps, and he is a strong voice in the Red Wall. So high drama already. We've got those 2 amendments, voting on Bill Cash's amendment, then Robert Jenrick's amendment, and all eyes now really as well on tomorrow and just how big this rebellion might be. The message from rebels, who I have to say are keeping their counsel at the moment. They're not really talking to the press. They're doing it quite consciously in order to just negotiate with the government. But the message very clear that they have put these amendments down in good faith. They think they have reasonable legal arguments. They thought the Prime Minister would negotiate with them, and now they expect him to do so. And if he does, questions are whether there might be a rebellion tomorrow. We have a handful of MPs saying that they will vote against the 3rd reading if the bill isn't changed. That includes Robert Jenrick, who confirmed that to me this morning, Suella Braverman, Simon Clarke, all former cabinet ministers, saying that they will vote down the legislation. The question is how many more will join them. 29 Conservative MPs voting against could sink the bill potentially. So it's a tightrope for the Prime Minister over the next 24 hours.
Yeah, tightrope, certainly. We're currently looking at those shots of the House of Commons, so we'll obviously dive straight back in as soon as we get a result on that Bill Cash amendment. And Beth, as you were speaking, I've just been handed the letter, the joint letter, signed by both Lee Anderson and Brendan Clark-Smith, so clearly 2 men really working in tandem here. They say we were elected in 2019 on the promise that we would get Brexit done and take back control. They go on about how important tackling illegal migration is, and then they say it's therefore important in terms of credibility that we're consistent with this. And Beth, it's only 2 people But at the same time, it feels to me that, Lee Anderson, Brendan Clark-Smith, they're kind of big characters on the backbenches. As you say, they're very aligned with the Red Wall. How concerned will Number 10 be by these resignations?
Look, I think the issue here is momentum. And what Number 10 doesn't want is for the rebels to build momentum. And you've had Suella Braverman saying she'll vote it down, Simon Clarke today saying he'll vote it down, Robert Jenrick today saying he'll vote it down. Now you've had 2 resignations. Now, there has been a consensus in Westminster over the past 24 to 48 hours when you ask around that there's an expectation that this bill would pass, because in that moment, would MPs really, having passed it at the second reading, at the third reading, vote down the legislation on Rwanda, throw in the Prime Minister, whatever Robert Jenrick said to me earlier today, that this wasn't a crisis situation, throw in a Prime Minister into a crisis with a party rejecting his totemic piece of legislation? There was a sense like, no, in the end they will bottle it, they won't do it. Whether they do or not, I can't tell you the answer yet. I spoke to one very senior Conservative about this earlier today, who's weighing up what to do, and they simply said to me they aren't sure what's going to happen, whether they could garner 30 MPs voting this down. But I think what is clear tonight is that they are trying to turn the screws on the Prime Minister, who has offered concessions. He's talking about trying to streamline court cases. He's talking about putting more judges into the courts in order to get this policy really going. They're saying, no, it's not enough. We need to tighten up the bill. I think the question is, in the end, how many people will actually vote against it? How many can the whips peel off, as they did so effectively on the second reading? I think the bigger picture, though, of all of this, and you, Sophie, just kind of alluded to it when you were talking about the totemicness of Lee Anderson, is that whichever way it goes tonight, if the PM wins this vote, it doesn't bring peace to the parliamentary party, and many think it just kicks the can down the road. There will be more boat crossings over the summer, and a very angry public and group of Conservative MPs that think this Prime Minister has failed. So a victory now could feel quite Pyrrhic in a few months.
Beth, thank you very much indeed. Beth Rigby there from Central Lobby, right in the heart of Parliament. We are keeping our eyes focused on what is happening in the House of Commons chamber. MPs currently voting on the Bill Cash amendment. We've already had 2 resignations. 2 of the deputy party chairs, Lee Anderson and Brendan Clark-Smith. And really, as I said earlier, this is a battle over a very important piece of legislation, but it will also be seen as a battle, really, for the soul of the Conservative Party too. Right, let's bring in our chief political correspondent, John Craig, shall we, who has seen an awful lot of votes in your time in the House of Commons.
Maastricht in the 1990s. When I was listening to Bill Cash today, it just reminded me of Bill Cash's attacks on John Major over Maastricht.
It's interesting.
John Redwood, he spoke as well.
Where would you rate this, the Rwanda battle?
The difference with this, of course, is that when John Smith was the Labour leader, of course, the Tory rebels were conspiring with John Smith to defeat John Major in a number of votes. You can just see in the middle of the picture, looks like 2 of the tellers there. I'm not sure. There's a lady in a red dress there. I wonder if that's Liz Truss, because I know she was at that. We think it's Miriam Cates, actually.
Looks a bit like Miriam Cates.
She spoke towards the end of the debate, actually. And she's obviously one of the tellers for the ayes, for the Bill Cash amendment. So we're about to get that vote. Can I just make a very quick comment on this joint letter? Do you read it? I've just had a chance to read it while you were talking to Beth. The tone, it's more in sorrow than in anger, isn't it? If you think back to a few weeks to the resignation of Suella Braverman, that fiery letter she wrote, and indeed the tone when Robert Jenrick quit, this is a real, look, we don't want to have to resign, but we feel we have to. And it ends by saying we want to make the legislation work. So it's not an angry letter firing both barrels.
A rare resignation letter in support of the Prime Minister.
It's as if they're saying, we don't want to resign, but we just feel we have to. And, well, they've obviously been told if you're going to resign, if you don't resign, you're going to be sacked, because the word from the Chief Whip's office was that anyone on what's called the payroll vote in the jargon. That's government ministers, junior bag carriers, parliamentary private secretaries. And clearly they regard Mr Anderson and Mr Clark-Smith as being on the payroll vote, even though they're party officials as opposed to government ministers.
Right, John, so explain what is actually happening. What is this Bill Cash amendment all about? Right,
this is the Bill Cash amendment, which is basically about disapplying various bits. Basically, it's making it harder for migrants to challenge their deportation. It's basically dumping all sorts of treaties, court rulings and so on. Bill Cash made a long speech earlier on in the debate, and I'm just looking at, here's the wording. It's disapply international law with regard to Rwanda being a safe country. So he made a long speech. The reason I mentioned Maastricht, because he was talking about parliamentary sovereignty in his speech and almost re-fighting the Brexit battles of a few years ago. I mean, Sir Bill Cash does...
Here we go.
Stop talking now. That's Rosie Winston in the chair.
The ayes to the right, 68. The noes to the left, 529.
So there you go. That is the result of the Bill Cash amendment.
The ayes to the right, 68. The noes to the left, 529. So the noes have it, the noes have it. Unlock.
This is all about limiting asylum seekers' ability to appeal, disapplying international law with regards to Rwanda being declared a safe country. A comfortable win for the government, obviously, 529 voting against, 68 in favour. But that's 68 rebellions.
That's a big number. That will give them real jitters in the Tory High Command. 68, if 68 vote against third reading tomorrow, then the Prime Minister's likely to lose third reading. Now,
John
that's 68.
If you can't see John a minute, I just said that he basically just drew his fingers across his neck. So I think you get the sense there about what John thinks would happen
68.
Tomorrow.
Now, on the order paper, this amendment and also the Robert Jenrick one, there are about 61, 62 names. So I think I'm right in saying the DUP MPs have voted with the rebels. So I suppose if you add the two tellers, it's 70, isn't it? So that's a big rebellion. That is a very big rebellion, and it spells trouble for the Prime Minister over the next 24 hours because it's more than put their names to the amendment, or either that or it's the same number plus the DUP.
And look, we don't know, do we, that all of the people who voted for this amendment are going to vote against the bill.
No,
but
right.
Like you say, there's going to be concern in number 10 about what this means.
It's a big number. It's a big figure. I mean, if for example, you'd had the Labour Party and the SNP and the Liberal Democrats voting against the government there, they would have lost that vote. I mean, you say 529 is a big number. Yes, it is. But that's the bulk of the House of Commons, really, isn't it? So I think the government should be very worried about that 68. I think it's a big number.
Because this is the thing, it's like we were saying earlier, it is not so much the results of these individual amendments, we're expecting them all to fail, but it's a show of hands. And if you think about what's just happened, the rebels on the right of the Conservative Party have shown their strength, potentially, in this vote around the Bill Cash amendment. 68 plus the two tellers, 70 against, as John was saying. That is going to have jitters. That's going to make number 10 pretty concerned.
Shall I just give you some of the names who were on the amendment who are almost certainly to have voted? Well, it was put down by Sir William Cash, Robert Jenrick, Sir Simon Clarke, Montfrancois, Danny Kruger, Jacob Rees-Mogg. Well-known names, Jake Berry, Suella Braverman, Sir John Hayes, one of the ringleaders there, to Desmond Swain, veteran MP like Sir Greg Knight, not really a serial rebel by any means. Bob Blackman, he's normally a loyalist. Then you've got Miriam Cates, we saw one of the tellers. Sir Ian Duncan-Smith, former leader of the party. Chris Chope, right-winger. Lee Anderson, we've talked about. Philip Davis. Jonathan Gullis, he put his name to it. Philip Hollowbone. Dame Andrea Jenkins. Now, she's significant because yesterday she was talking about getting a big vote for the rebellion. And then she was talking about getting letters of no confidence in so we can have a proper Tory leader, she was saying. Edward Lee, John Redwood, Liz Truss, of course, and Brenda Clark-Smith, Ian Little Granger, not normally a rebel. So that has attracted some Tory MPs who are not what you might call the usual suspects or serial rebels.
John, thank you very much indeed. John Craig there talking us through what has just happened, because 68 MPs, the bulk of them on the right of the Conservative Party, saying that they are uncomfortable with the current Rwanda legislation. They want to toughen it up. And that, of course, spells trouble for Rishi Sunak and whether or not he is going to be able to get that through the House of Commons. Let's go to Beth Rippey, shall we, who's standing by for us in Central Lobby. How will number 10 take that number? 68 MPs voting in favour of the Bill Crash Amendment.
Well, Sophie, it's more rebels than had put their name to the amendment. I'd be interested to see if any junior bag carriers, any very junior people on the payroll might have also voted for that amendment and therefore might have to resign, but 70 rebels, it's a huge rebellion. I was looking back today, actually, to see when you saw rebellions of this number, and I had to go back to 2012. I found one. That was when just over 90 Conservatives rebelled against a 3-line whip to reform the House of Lords. It was, of course, the coalition years. It was a Lib Dem bill, and these rebels defied that 3-line whip. And they voted down that piece of legislation. And what these rebels are signalling tonight with this amendment, knowing that it won't pass because the Lib Dems and Labour wouldn't support, but it is a show of strength, if you like, to the Prime Minister and the government, that there are scores of MPs who feel very strongly that this legislation should be toughened up. And when you speak to some of those rebels, what they say to you, and it's actually what Robert Jenrick said to me on camera earlier today, is that the government, or they feel that Rishi Sunak, in good faith, said to them, if you can come forward with reasonable legal arguments as to why you think you can strengthen this bill and still keep in the parameters of international law, I am listening. And I will look at those amendments. And Robert Jenrick feels he's done that. They've got legal counsel from a former Attorney General in Northern Ireland saying that there's a reasonable legal argument that these amendments work. And they are confounded, really, as to why the government won't accept these amendments. And I think the message that they are sending the Prime Minister and number 10 tonight is that we gave you some leeway on that second reading. There was abstentions, but people didn't vote it down. But we are building in numbers and we really want to see it through. Now, if in the end MPs decide to really vote down the Rwanda Bill tomorrow, that's an entirely different matter. But if tonight you're in number 10 and you're looking at 70 of your own MPs backing that amendment, that is deeply uncomfortable. And I think the pressure is only going to build now over the next 24 hours as we get to that vote on the third reading of this bill.
And Beth, can you just give us a bit of a sense about how much this matters for Rishi Sunak? Because, look, this is a vote that's about a very important piece of legislation, the Rwanda Bill. So that matters in itself. But it's a huge test for the Prime Minister and his authority as well, isn't it?
Yeah, of course, Sophie. And the thing is, when you talk to rebels, what they say is that this is about the policy and making the policy work. This is not an existential crisis for a Prime Minister. This is not a confidence vote in the Prime Minister. But look, in practical terms, the Prime Minister has staked his reputation on stopping the boats. He has made this Rwanda Bill the set piece of his premiership. And if his party vote it down, well, of course he's in crisis. His authority will be absolutely shot. And I think many of them will be weighing that up when they think about that vote. This close to a general election, do they really want to completely defenestrate their Prime Minister, or will they grit their teeth and in the end go through the voting lobbies with colleagues and keep this bill alive? I do think there is still an issue, which is what the rebels will be arguing, that they don't think this bill will work. You will hear them talk about the government's own legal advice saying it only has a 50% chance of success. There's a sense when you talk to them that they think the Prime Minister is naturally quite cautious, that he's kicking the can down the road. He's hoping that the Strasbourg courts won't enforce these injunctions to keep planes grounded, or that the courts will be lenient on the government, or somehow something will come good and these planes will get off the ground and the boats will carry on slowing down. But there's many MPs who are looking at this thinking we are going to lose our seats. I mean, one rebel said to me earlier today, if the Prime Minister does not strengthen up this bill, he's effectively, so I'm just looking to see if I can grab anyone, he's effectively given P45s to dozens of MPs in red wall seats where this is a very, very important issue for voters, and they simply won't give the Conservatives another chance. So, of course, it's about policy, but there's so much politics bound up in this, and a Prime Minister that loses this vote, I mean, his authority's already being tested. It will be very, very damaged if he can't succeed on this legislation. But as I was saying earlier, even if he celebrates and there's a victory this week, it will not bring peace in the Conservative Party. I think the best hope he would have, Sophie, is at that point to almost put the Rwanda small boats policy on the back burner for a bit, or try and kick that can into the long grass, if you like, and then refocus his attention on the economy, talking about tax cuts, talking about growth, talking about inflation coming down, and begin to try to sell that story to the electorate that he was pitching earlier this month, which is, look, we're on the right track. Don't go back to square one, as he would put it, with the Labour Party. I think that's what he's going to want to try to sell to the electorate. But if his party is still trapped in this psychodrama over Rwanda and illegal migration, it's going to be very hard to project any sense of unity within his party.
OK. Beth, thank you very much indeed. Beth Rigby there, talking about the significance of that vote. Now, we've got a little bit of news to bring you, haven't we, John? Because we just got the so-called division list. So we know who's voted in favour of the Bill Cash amendment and who's rebelled against the government.
Yeah, we can confirm the names now, as we thought. The two tellers were Miriam Cates and Jacob Rees-Mogg. And I'll run through quickly the rebels, the Tory rebels. Adam Afreer, Lee Anderson, Sarah Atherton, Sir Jake Berry, Bob Blackman, Ben Bradley, Suella Braverman, Jack Brereton, Paul Bristow, Sir Bill Cash, Raymond Chishti, Sir Christopher Chope, Sir Simon Clarke, Brendan Clark-Smith, Philip Davies, Sarah Dines, Richard Drax, Sir James Duddridge, Sir Ian Duncan-Smith, Michael Fabricant, Nick Fletcher, Kevin Foster, Mark Francois, Chris Green, James Grundy, Jonathan Gullis, Sir John Hayes, Darren Henry, Sir Philip Hollowbone, Adam Holloway, Eddie Hughes, Tom Hunt, Robert Jenrick, Caroline Johnson, David Jones, Danny Kruger, Andrew Luer, Marco Longhi, Jonathan Lord, Craig McKinley, Carl McCartney, Robin Miller, Anne-Marie Morris, Jill Mortimer, Wendy Morton, Nikki, Leah Nietzsche, Neil O'Brien, Matthew Offord, Tom Randall, John Redwood, Lawrence Robertson, Gary Sambrook, Greg Smith, Henry Smith, Jane Stevenson, Sir Desmond Swain, Liz Truss, Sir Bill Wiggin. And then from the DUP...
Have a glass of water, John. Just have a sip of water. I'm worried about you.
Gregory Campbell, Geoffrey Donaldson, Paul Girvan, Carla Lockhart, Ian Paisley, Gavin Robinson, Jim Shannon and Sammy Wilson. And then a couple of independents who are former Tories, Scott Benton and Andrew Bridgen.
I mean, that really gives you a sense, doesn't it, of just how many rebellions there had been.
It's more or less the names I read out earlier who actually put their name to the amendment on the order paper. So they have all carried out their threat. So they've got the backing of the DUP as well. There are one or two surprise names there. People I'd have regarded as serial loyalists, actually. I'm just looking at Gary Sambrook. He's a member of the 1922 executive. There are, as I mentioned earlier, there are names there that are not your usual suspects.
And it's important to note that, look, it's a lot easier to vote in favour of this amendment that you know isn't going to pass anyway than to vote against the third reading of the Rwanda Bill, which, you know, that is a huge deal if that doesn't pass for the authority of Rishi Sunak and for, you know, I guess, splits in the Conservative Party. That is important to say. But at the same time, that is an awful lot of MPs that the government is now going to have just about.
Yeah. I mean, the ones who I would suggest are not your usual suspects probably will not join a rebellion tomorrow. But those hardliners, the ones who spoke in the debate and those who've already said, I mean, Suella Braverman, people like that, and the real hardliners probably will carry out their threat to vote against tomorrow. Shall I just explain what's happening now? We are now on a vote on what's called in the jargon a stand pass. It's a sort of formality, really. When an amendment's defeated, you have to have Clause 2 stand part, and Clause 2 is the bill, is the clause which says in the bill, safety of the Republic of Rwanda. So I'm not sure if I don't think we've had that result yet, or have we? I'm not sure.
Anyway, it's not. I think we've just had it, but this is not one of the big ones, as John was saying. The next one for us all to be keeping our eyes on is the Robert Jenrick amendment. Yeah. That's another big Conservative rebel amendment that is going to be very interesting to see how that falls. It looks like we're moving on to that now, so perhaps worth listening in.
Say aye. Contrary, no. No. Tell us for the ayes, Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg and Miriam Cates. Tell us for the noes, Mark Fletcher and Robert Love.
So this is the Robert Jenrick amendment. This is amendment number 19, I think, from memory.
And this is all about trying to make it harder for people to appeal against their deportation. So making it more difficult to get put on a... or trying to stop it being...
Indeed, yeah. It removed the ability of individuals to block their own removal through suspensive claims. Not quite sure that's a bit of legal jargon, isn't it?
You can spot the lawyers, can't you?
Limit such claims to rare situations where there's bad faith on the part of decision makers in relation to decisions as to medical fitness to travel. So this one's this is also one of the key amendments, really. And well, if the vote on the Bill Cash amendment is anything to go by, we're in for another big rebellion here. It's quite amusing, actually, looking... It's always amusing when you've got both big parties voting together. It makes the division lobby very crowded. There were 529, weren't there, in the no lobby last time? That'll make it very crowded. It all seems to be quite orderly so far. Do you remember the night before Liz Truss's government fell? The chaotic scenes in the lobby with Wendy Morton, the then Chief Whip, who, incidentally, I think is one of the rebels tonight.
And Liz Truss as well, another rebel tonight.
Yeah, I know, yeah. I mean, it really is the Trussites, the Boris Johnson supporter. Remember, earlier today, Boris Johnson tweeted urging Tory MPs to vote for these amendments. So it's the revenge of the former Prime Ministers, if you like.
It's also, it feels to me, fitting that you mention that chaotic night in the division lobbies with Liz Truss, because really that was, you know, the end for Liz Truss. And it is important to realise that, you know, this legislation and the battles over legislation matter so much for the authority of Prime Ministers. It's often when they can't get legislation through that spells the beginning of the end, I guess, for them as well.
It's when a government, any government... I mean, OK, we're not yet at the stage of a vote of confidence in Rishi Sunak, but Dame Andrea Jenkins was calling for that last night. But if this bill does not pass tomorrow, then what a blow that is. I mean, I was over coming on my way back to our studio, of course, you come through the House of Lords, and I bumped into a veteran peer, ex-minister. I said, what do you think's going to happen when this Rwanda Bill gets to the House of Lords? Ha ha, if it gets to the House of Lords, he said. And then he said, and if it does, it won't leave the House of Lords. So the Lords are sort of rubbing their hands, licking their lips, to try and pull this bill apart. I mean, this battle is no means over, even if the Prime Minister gets this bill through the Commons, which we'll know for certain tomorrow. But he's got off to a bad start tonight with that big rebellion of 68.
And we'll find out what happens with the Amendment 19, the Robert Jenrick amendment, shortly. Worth just reminding you of the two resignations that we've seen as well this evening. Two of the deputy party chairs of the party resigning so that they could vote in favour of the Bill Cash amendment. Lee Anderson, the first one, MP for Ashfield, which was a Labour seat until he won it in 2019. A big character, a big red wall character who has decided to quit alongside Brendan Clark-Smith, MP for Bassetlaw, again, a seat that Labour held until he won it in 2019. And they co-wrote this extraordinary resignation letter that, as John was saying, is pretty polite. It's very conciliatory.
Not like Sunak Braverman.
No, absolutely not. But they were effectively saying that it was important in terms of their credibility that they voted to toughen up the Rwanda Bill, saying that when they were elected in 2019, taking those two seats off Labour and the Red Wall, we promised the public that we would get Brexit done and take back control. They clearly see stopping the boats as a big part of their promise to their constituents in the Red Wall, and they feel that it's something that they do need to make sure that they follow through. John, you were saying it's quite a polite resignation letter, but it's still a bit of a headache for the Prime Minister.
Oh, yes. Yes. I mean, as you say, these two are classic Red Wallers. Lee Anderson, ex-miner, used to be a Labour Party agent, fell out with the Labour Party locally and went and defected to the Tories. The previous MP for that seat was Gloria De Piero, a former television journalist who has now gone back to TV. She stood down. He didn't defeat her. He's a controversial figure. Critics call him 30p Lee because he once made a criticism of people who rely on people who use food banks, said they could make themselves a meal for 30p. Brendan Clark-Smith is MP for Bassetlaw. That's in North Nottinghamshire. It's towns of Retford and Worksop round there. The seat was represented previously by John Mann, who's now an independent peer. I think he's an anti-Semitism czar, isn't he? Seats that had been Labour for years and years and years and years, and have got. Obviously, the Labour Party wants to get those seats back, and obviously these two MPs think that you mentioned the promises they made to their electorate. They were really part of the Boris Johnson vanguard, if you like, who came in. I always remember there was that photograph in 2019, Boris Johnson with all his new MPs. I can't remember, there was more than 100, I think, many of them from the Red Wall. And this is, I suppose, the Red Wall fighting back. And I mentioned already that Boris Johnson had urged Tory MPs to vote for these amendments today. And the Red Wall is fighting back. Although, actually, if you look at the list of the rebels, they're not all Red Wallers by any means, actually. A lot of them are from safe Tory seats in the Shires. I mean, you think of Jacob Rees-Mogg down in Somerset, John Redwood, Wokingham, and a lot of them are not Red Wallers by any means, but, I mean, Adam Afriyie, Windsor, well, that's hardly Red Wall, is it?
Yeah, it's not Bassetlaw and Ashfield, let's be honest, is it? And the next battle, the next kind of face I think it's worth focusing on is Robert Jenrick himself, the person who has put his name to the Amendment 19 that they're voting on now, that we're going to get the result on shortly, trying to make it harder for people to appeal against their deportation. MP for Newark. But he was a close ally of Rishi Sunak, close friend of Rishi Sunak. What's going on here?
Very much so. If you think back to the Tory leadership campaign when it was Rishi Sunak versus Liz Truss, Robert Jenrick was one of Rishi Sunak's leading supporters. You think back when Robert Jenrick came in a by-election in Newark in 2014, Rishi Sunak, Richmond, William Hague's old seat in 2015. I think I'm right in saying that the three of them read a pamphlet together. It was Rishi Sunak, Oliver Dowden, who's now Deputy Prime Minister, and Robert Jenrick. Now, let's talk a bit about Robert Jenrick. There are those who say that he was very miffed that he was not promoted to Home Secretary when Suella Braverman was sacked and James Cleverly got the job. Today, he made a very good speech in the Commons, very well argued, spoke without notes, very measured, no ranting. A lot of MPs were saying, leadership? I mean, people have also talked about his new haircut. He's lost weight.
He's been out visiting the floods.
Yeah, well,
like
to be fair, they were in his Newark constituency.
Fair, but it's, I mean, look, I'm a sceptic with all this stuff. I'm too cynical.
But with the Tory right, he's done himself a lot of good today.
Exactly. I'm very cynical when it comes to this stuff, I have to say, as I'm sure you are as well, John. But it does really feel like Robert Jenrick, with his actions over the last few weeks, resigning, obviously, as immigration minister, the guy who was the face of the Rwanda policy, resigning because it wasn't hard enough. I mean, like you say, he really has won a few friends on the right of the Conservative Party. Yes,
and he knows the stuff. He demonstrated in his speech today that he knows this subject inside out. He was when he took interventions from both opposition MPs and some of his own colleagues. Tim Lawton was one. He quoted the figures back straight away because he knew them. He's done the job for a couple of years, so he is an expert on this. And if you're looking for a candidate from the Tory right, if there is a leadership contest after next election, you could argue that Suella Braverman's now busted flush. Kemi Badenoch obviously fancies her chances. But after today, I think the Tory right will be looking at Robert Jenrick and saying, not bad.
It'd be so interesting to see what happens. I'm really interested in that whole kind of psychodrama between Rishi Sunak and Robert Jenrick, I have to say. Really is worth kind of pausing to reflect on the importance of what is going on with this Rwanda legislation as well, more widely. Of course, it's about the legislation itself, the bill, trying to stop the boats, which is a big issue for lots of people across the country. I'm sure some of our viewers at home care deeply about it as well. But this is also, it feels to me, about the battle for the soul of the Conservative Party and the future of the Conservative Party. You can see the five families, the warring factions, who is going to come out on top. And I think that is certainly something that is getting played over today. The Bill Cash amendment, with 68 MPs voting in favour of that amendment in the face of the government. Well, if anything like that number of Conservative MPs rebels at third reading, then that is bad news for the chances of Rishi Sunak getting that Rwanda legislation through. But, I mean, whatever happens with it, I guess, it really does expose the difficulties at the centre of the Conservative Party, and there are questions about the authority of Rishi Sunak as well. Well, we can go now to our political editor, Beth Rigby, who's at the Central Lobby for us. Beth, we've been talking about Robert Jenrick and the extraordinary journey he's had as being, bosom buddies with Rishi Sunak to trying to blow up the Rwanda Bill. You spoke to him earlier today, Beth. What did he say?
Yeah, I was just listening to you and John talking about that, and I did ask him about this earlier today. Now, you might remember back in 2019 when Boris Johnson launched his leadership campaign, there were the three amigos. It was Robert Jenrick, Rishi Sunak and Oliver Dowden, now the Deputy Prime Minister. And these were the rising stars of the Tory moderates at the time, the young Tories coming out, writing an op-ed in support of Johnson and then coming out to back him. And they were the future once. Well, now they're very present running the party. So, yeah, Robert Jenrick and Rishi Sunak, they're not just political allies, they're really good friends. So I, too, am quite interested in the dynamics between them. And when I asked him about this at the end of the interview today, I just pulled out what he said. I sort of said, you're at war, do you feel like you could be friends again? They haven't spoken or seen each other, I don't think, since Robert Jenrick resigned. And he said to me, we're not at war. The Prime Minister and I are friends and colleagues. And he said, I desperately want him to succeed. I want him and us to win a general election. What I'm trying to do is make an argument that I think will put us in the best possible position whenever that election comes. So, very much in that moment saying this is all about policy, not about politics. But how could he not be sore to be put in as number two in the Home Office, and then when the Prime Minister sacks Suella Braverman, instead of putting his old ally and a former Cabinet Minister, Robert Jenrick, into the Home Office position, he moved cleverly over and dropped Lord Cameron into the Foreign Office. I mean, that must have hurt Robert Jenrick personally. In the politics politics of it, he is, of course, trying to make it all about policy, but he knows how damaging this is politically for a Prime Minister, and I have no doubt that he does have an eye on what comes next. He's positioned himself, if you like, as one of the sensible faces of the Tory right, laying the amendments, making the argument, putting himself really in competition with his great rival, Suella Braverman. Also watch for Priti Patel on the right of the party. She is playing her cards close to her chest. She's not rebelling on this legislation. I think she's trying to work with the government to help get it through. She, of course, was a former Home Secretary. And could she become a preferred candidate on the right of the party as well? So, you know, within all of this talk around the Rwanda Bill, of course, there are some MPs with an eye on what comes afterwards. And Rob Jenrick would insist that this is about policy, that he was in the Home Office, that he hardened his position, having seen the policy not working, not just on illegal, but on legal migration. And he really believes that this is an existential moment for the Conservatives, and they've got to win on this to have any hope of winning lapsed Conservatives back in the next general election. But it also quite conveniently makes him a leader on a wing of the party that will have a big say in who replaces Rishi Sunak should he lose the next general election.
Beth, thank you very much indeed. Beth Rigby there in Central Lobby. It's interesting talking about Robert Jenrick. Oh, here we go. We're going to go straight to the House of Commons. Let's listen.
Order.
The ayes to the right, 58. The noes to the left, 525.
The ayes to the right, 58. The noes to the left, 525. So the noes have it, the noes have it. Unlock. The question is that Clause 4 stand part of the bill. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. The contrary, no.
So the government breezing through as expected, but look at the rebellion number. That's the one that matters. 58 MPs voting in favour of Amendment 19. That's the Robert Jenrick amendment, which would make it harder for asylum seekers to appeal against deportation to Rwanda. 58 MPs voting in favour of that amendment. And that, of course, is 10 lower than the 68 who backed the Bill Cash amendment. But again, a pretty sizable number there. Well, we're joined by John Craig. We're also joined by our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, who's standing by with us too. Sam, what do you make of that number, 58?
So when the Tory rebels cast that vote, walked through that division lobby today, they knew that it was in defiance of what the Prime Minister wanted, but they also knew that there was probably realistically not much consequence for doing what they were doing. That all changes potentially tomorrow, because if the same number of Tory MPs defy the Prime Minister in 24 hours in what's known as third reading, if third reading goes ahead, and that's a vote on the amended final bill as it's been dealt with in the Commons, then that bill would fall because those rebels would have teamed up with the opposition and Rishi Sunak would no longer have a majority for the legislation, so it would fall. It is hard to overstate the consequences for the Prime Minister if that happens. He has ended up, almost by mistake, making the Rwanda legislation and the Rwanda policy absolutely central to his premiership. It didn't feel like something he wanted to do at the start, but this is where he is, this is what he's done, and now he's staring at this, the potential for it to be defeated in possibly as little as 24 hours. Now, it's not formally an issue of confidence, it's not formally something that could topple him, but I think the future of his government will be in very, very bad straits if he loses on a big vote like that.
And as you say, Sam, you know, it's not saying that all of these 58 people are going to vote against third reading because there's much higher stakes. But there's going to be jitters, isn't there? Surely. They'll be looking at these numbers, 68, 58, blimey.
Look, I think the reason why number 10 feel a bit under attack, and actually it comes back to that poll that we were discussing yesterday, and the point about that poll was that there is an anonymous, big money donor funding political activity effectively to destabilise the Prime Minister. And they didn't know that was going to happen. They've been extremely concerned in Conservative headquarters in the last 24 hours about exactly that. So there are big money donors, there are more MPs than they thought, and now they are going to have to make a massive decision tonight. Do they go ahead with that big vote tomorrow, or do they pull it?
All important. Thank you very much indeed.
I just wonder, Sophie, the rebellion was down from 68 plus tellers to 58 plus tellers. I wonder if perhaps the DUP did not vote for that amendment. I don't know, just a guess.
Yeah, because I was trying to work that out. You know, what happened to that 10? You know, if you back Bill Cash, why wouldn't you back Robert Jenrick as well?
Yeah.
It could be that John's got to the bottom of it.
Well, just a guess. I may be wrong.
We'll find out soon. All the action this evening, of course, in the House of Commons chamber, and just outside of that is Central Lobby, which is always absolutely brimming full of MPs at this time. So let's try and go to Central Lobby now, if we can. I think Beth Ruby is there.
Yeah. Hi, Sophie. Yes, I have just managed to grab Mark Francois, the chair of the ERG, one of those leading rebel groups about this legislation. Let's have a listen to what Mark thinks. Mark, you had 70 rebels on the Cash Amendment, 58 on the Jenrick Amendment. What's your message to government tonight?
I think the numbers speak for themselves. I think they show that there's a great deal of concern on the Conservative backbenches, because of course ministers have to vote with the government, about the bill, and we have further votes tomorrow. I hope very much that the government will listen, and as a result of this, what I think you yourself tweeted was a big rebellion, Beth, I mean, you know how these things work, that the government will listen and take stock, and that perhaps there'll be some possibility of tightening the bill, as the Prime Minister put it, tomorrow.
Let's just Chase. If he doesn't change the bill and if he doesn't accept that some amendments will make it more robust, what happens tomorrow, Mark? Does he lose the third reading?
The numbers speak for themselves, Beth.
Yeah, but
No, Beth, the numbers speak for themselves, and I'm not going beyond that. You've interviewed me many times before, and I never talk about votes before they happen.
Can I play devil's advocate a bit and suggest that? Can I suggest though that the rebels bottled it a bit at the second reading? There was all talk about you were going to vote down the second reading, and we chased you all around thinking you were, and in the end there were less than 30 abstentions and the bill went through. And there's a sense that in the end people will be picked off and this bill will pass.
Well, hardly anyone was picked off on the Cash Amendment. There were 63 names on the amendment paper this morning, and with a bit of help from the DUP, there were 70 votes, if you include the tellers, you know how it works, tonight. So hardly anyone was picked off. At second reading, we were very clear. We took the Prime Minister at his word. He asked people not to vote against the bill at second reading so that we could get to the committee stage where he said the bill could be tightened, i.e. amended. So we didn't run away from anything. We listened to the Prime Minister. We're now at the stage where the bill can be amended tomorrow. The numbers speak for themselves, and we very much hope that the Prime Minister will listen and that there will be a concession.
Is he not acting in good faith?
No, I think the Prime Minister has acted in good faith, but given the size of that vote tonight, if I were his advisers, which I'm not, I'd be saying, I think we want to compromise tomorrow, sir, if we can.
I think there's a message though, which is if we're warning you tonight, unless you tighten this bill, we are going to torpedo it. This is your message.
My message, Beth, is that we all want to stop the boats. We want to tighten the bill so we can do that. We want to help honour the Prime Minister's pledge to stop them, and the numbers speak for themselves.
Isn't it sort of cutting off your nose to spite your face, though, to completely collapse the bill because it's not, you know, perfect, or it's not as good as you would want it to be?
We need to tighten the bill to make it work effectively. We do need to get those flights away to Rwanda. Okay. Beth, tomorrow is another day.
I know, I hope you'll come back. Quick final question. Lee Anderson, Brendan Clark-Smith, Jane Stevenson, I think, is also going to have to resign or be sacked. What's your reaction to that?
I think the only fair answer to that is you have to talk to them about that.
And clearly you are going to vote down the bill if it doesn't change. Just to be clear, I didn't even ask you, I just assumed.
The numbers speak for themselves.
OK, thank you so much, thank you. So Mark Francois there saying a clear message to the Prime Minister. You've seen the size of the rebellions and it might be wise for you to compromise and tighten the bill. It's going to be quite a fraught 24 hours.
Yeah, it certainly is. I'm sure you'll be there every step of the way, Beth. Beth would be there in Central Lobby. Well, let's talk again to John and Sam, shall we? The numbers speak for themselves, according to Mark Francois.
Yeah, I was interested, though, what he said about a compromise. I don't quite see how they can reach a compromise tomorrow unless the Prime Minister's going to make some concessions. For example, I think I'm right in saying you can put forward at the very last minute, can't you, what's called a paper amendment, I think, can't you? So I guess it's possible that the government might come forward with some of their own amendments to accommodate some of the concerns that the rebels... But that would be a huge climb down.
And then also, if you do that, do you risk alienating the other side of the Conservative Party as well, the more centrist MPs who are holding their nose and voting for this because they don't want to sink the Prime Minister?
Look at the thing that today has had the biggest rebellion. It was to stop international law applying to the Rwanda policy. Rishi Sunak has been absolutely clear. He sort of staked his political reputation on not endorsing that view. It would attract the ire of the international community, of the Rwandan government that might junk the policy altogether. It would inflame the rebels or the One Nationers, the moderates, as Sophie was just saying. He can't do that with any credibility whatsoever. He compromises. He destroys his own ability to hold the line on anything. And the other thing that struck me yesterday, listening to the Prime Minister in that long statement about the Red Sea and the Houthis, he kept on talking about international law, didn't he? About the Israelis and everybody else acting within international law. I sat there listening to that and I thought, it's not what you're doing on the Rwanda Bill.
It's true. Thanks both very much indeed. John and Sam there speaking to us. I think we've got... apologies, I thought we were going to a break. That is not happening. Let's talk again to John and Sam. It's a bit of one of those slightly freewheeling days for us today with breaking news, which is what we love. We enjoy that, don't we?
On days like today, what people ask us to do is we go around and sort of talk to lots of different bits of the party, and a couple of things have been really striking today. First of all, I've got a sense that the government didn't completely take this seriously until a little bit too late. Look, there's no doubt everybody thought that the bluff of the rebels was called before Christmas, but the kind of mood music out of the rebels publicly at the weekend, out of government at the weekend, was, we think we got this. Doesn't feel like that right now. And so there's a little bit of surprise. And the other thing I really picked up today is bits of the Conservative Party in government that you would have thought were supportive of Rishi Sunak are much more critical behind the scenes than you'd think. They don't think Number 10 is working. They think it's micromanaging. They think it's blocking things. They think it doesn't have a vision. They don't think it could be worse at, 15 percentage points behind in the polls. So just a couple of signs that things really are quite bad in bits of the Tory party.
What I'm trying to work out is how much of this is a warning shot, a message to say, look, we don't really like this very much at all. Please change your course, Rishi Sunak. I have to say, I'm still hesitating about how many of the 68 or the 58 are going to end up rebelling on third reading. Because what's the plan then? If you can't get the Rwanda legislation through, what do they want? A change of leader? Do they want a general election sooner? What's the plan after that?
Well, we've mentioned Dame Andrea Jenkins, what she was saying last night. Some of them do. There are some of them who yearn for a return by Boris Johnson. Well, he's not even in Parliament. His chief cheerleader, Nadine Dorries, isn't in Parliament anymore either. But some of them think like that. The other point I was going to make, actually, Sam, we talk about observations being around Parliament today. The fury of what you might call moderate, One Nation, whatever you like to call them, mainstream Tory MPs. I think I can't remember where I was going to or from the meeting of the Kruger crew, as I call them, up in Committee Room 19, and I bumped into a member of the One Nation. Oh, the vituperative tone, to use a fancy word.
That's a great word, John.
The anger of some of Tory MPs at the behaviour of those rebels, because they take the view, of course, that it is undermining the Prime Minister and it is creating all sorts of problems for the government.
It's going to be the mother of all civil wars should the Conservative Party hit opposition after the general election.
Because that's worth thinking about as well, isn't it? Because this is the other part of this, not just about Rwanda, not just about Rishi Sunak, but about the Conservative Party. And we're almost seeing, the kind of soap opera play out in front of us, that the battle, it's going to be hard for them to come together.
That's right. And you asked what's about to happen. Are the 58 to 60 going to do the same when the stakes are much higher tomorrow? And we don't know, but there's going to be a group. Basically, it's going to come down to personal human dynamics. And what I have seen many, many times before is at moments like this, there are groups of people, often men, groups of men, sitting in a room, and sometimes they just wind each other up, something chronic, to the point where they really do go and do something existential. Sometimes all the kind of heat goes out of it and they go completely in the other direction. It's going to be about the individual personal dynamics of the people in the rooms that make the decisions over the next 12 to 14 hours that's going to determine the future of our politics. Because, as I say, if this gets defeated, all bets are off as to what happens next. And I've just been struck, Sophie, there are people I would have thought that would blast out of the water what will seem to many members of the public the ridiculous notion that the Conservative Party might change leader for yet another time. And that when you raise the subject, they're like, well, I might not be quite for it yet, but I'm not totally against it because things are so bad. I mean, as I say, this idea is not being shut down quite as readily as I would expect, and I think the public would expect the Conservative Party to do at this point.
Yeah, there's been quite a few Conservative leaders recently. I'm not sure if we can cope with another one.
I talked to Robin Walker, who's the MP for Worcester, whose father, of course, was the Tory grandee Peter Walker, who served under Heath and Thatcher. And Peter Walker was in the House for years and years and years and years. And Robin told me he's standing down at the next election because in the short time he's been in Parliament, the Tory party's had more leaders than when his father was in the Parliament for 30-odd years. Can I just tell you, the DUP did, in fact, abstain in that vote.
There you go, John. John called it.
That explains why it was down from 68 to 50.
So does that mean, then, 58 Conservatives? Because that's an awful lot,
plus tellers, plus two tellers. And I've just heard also that Richard Tice, who I think you interviewed recently, didn't you, is now saying they are going to stand a candidate in the Kingswood by-election. Were they not going to before? I'm not sure.
Yes, he said that he was not going to stand a candidate in that by-election as a protest because he was so outraged at the Conservatives' green policy and the actions of Chris Skidmore. He now clearly thinks that he wants to stand a candidate, and it's significant because Reform are saying that they want to stand a candidate in every seat at the next election, which no deal's cut between friendly MPs. Right. What's your sort of big takeaway, Sam? How concerned should they be in number 10?
I think they've been too relaxed, and I think they should be very concerned. What we often underestimate at moments like this is that there is a genuine chasm inside the Conservative Party on policy. This is about people, but it's also about what has always been an irreconcilable split between one side that wants to pull out of the European Convention of Human Rights and disapply international law and another that doesn't. There's no way of bridging that gap. There's no sugarcoating it. Maybe tomorrow they really want to start that war in earnest.
We'll find out. Thank you both very much indeed for guiding us through the votes over the last hour. Coming up next at 7, we're going to have more Politics Hub. Lots more analysis of what this all means, including from Danny Kruger, one of the leading rebels, someone who's been a thorn in the side of the Prime Minister. What has he got to say for himself? We'll find out in a few minutes' time. Hello, good evening. Well, as you join us tonight, MPs have been voting on a series of amendments to the government's Rwanda Bill. Now, none of them, including those by Conservative rebels, passed. So, good evening's work for the government whips. But just look at the scale of the Conservative rebellion, how many of the Prime Minister's own MPs were willing to stand against him on a bill which Rishi Sunak has invested so much of his time and political capital in. And two of them, Deputy Party Chairman Lee Anderson and Brendan Clark-Smith, have resigned. What we're seeing tonight is not so much a battle over a bill, although it is that too. It's over the future direction of the Conservative Party and which element within it has its hand on the steering wheel. Well, tonight we will take you through all of the aftermath. It's Tuesday, I'm Sophy Ridge, live from Westminster, and this is a specially extended Politics Hub. Well, the two amendments that we're interested in, the Bill Cash Amendment, 68 people backed that one, MPs backed that one, and the Generic Amendment, 58 MPs backed that one. Let's find out what it all means. We're joined by our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates. I mean, that is a chunky rebellion. That's a lot of MPs.
Tonight, the Conservative Party has shown once again its capacity, frankly, for self-harm in an election year. 60 Conservative MPs in those votes defied the Prime Minister, the Prime Minister's insistent attempts to get a bill through that has become absolutely central to his premiership. Now, tonight there were votes that were effectively symbolic because they didn't pass, because the opposition parties didn't join with all the rebels. But what happened today is that the rebels showed their hand. Unlike before Christmas, where we were talking about all of this before, and it seemed like Rishi Sunak's premiership was on the line, the rebels before Christmas abstained. Today, they showed that they were willing to vote against the Prime Minister. Two of them showed that they were willing to not just resign, but give up tens of thousands of pounds a year in salaries, which is what they got as deputy chairman of the Conservative Party. And they showed that they had the numbers that it's needed to defeat the government in a vote which could come as quickly as tomorrow, in which the opposition will join with them on the whole Rwanda bill. So tonight in Downing Street, Rishi Sunak has the choice of his life. Does he look at that group of rebels, the list of names from Miriam Cates, Danny Kruger, Ian Duncan-Smith to Liz Truss, and think, I'm going to call their bluff, hold this vote. I don't really think that when it's existential, they're going to vote me down because it could mean me losing my job and them losing their seats? Or does he delay? Does he pull tomorrow's expected vote? And does he see if he can find another way through? It's a huge moment for him. And we're right back at the heart of the Conservative psychodrama.
We really are. Sam, thank you very much indeed. Well, let's talk to one of those Conservative rebels, shall we? We can go live to Central Lobby in Houses of Parliament, where Danny Kruger joins us now. Thank you so much for being with us, and apologies for keeping you waiting as well. Right, the million-dollar question. You voted in favour of these amendments tonight. Are you prepared to vote against the Rwanda Bill at third reading if it's not amended?
Well, I'm prepared to do that, but we're not at that stage yet. And I really hope that the scale of the vote in favour of the amendments that were debated today will convince the government that they really should adopt these amendments as their own. That's what we really want to do. We want to vote for the bill, which is a good bill, by the way. There's really significant improvements on the status quo that this bill would enact. So we are supportive of what the government's doing. They've already made significant moves to disapply the human rights, European human rights laws and the powers of the European Court that has frustrated our illegal migration policy so far. So I think the government's in a good place. We want it to go a little bit further. The parliamentary process allows for amendments like this to be tabled, and let's see what they come back with tomorrow.
Now, I'm sorry if this makes it sound like an obvious question. You say you're prepared to vote against the bill at third reading if it's amended. Does that mean you will vote against it?
I'm sorry, I won't be drawn on the on what I'll actually do tomorrow night because we don't know what the bill will look like. I'm hopeful that there will be some changes.
We know what it will look like if it's not amended, don't we? So I can ask you that question.
Well, as I say, I'm prepared to do that. We're in a conversation with government. I don't think it's appropriate for me to conduct that negotiation here. the fact is the numbers speak for themselves. There are significant numbers of colleagues who are unhappy with the bill, only marginally, by the way, which is why I don't like all this talk of playing hard with them. We're in a positive conversation with the government. They haven't yet accepted what we think they need to do. I'm sorry that we've got to the stage that we had to break the whip and vote against the government tonight. The conversations hasn't yet yielded the results that we're hoping for, but we've still got a way to go. There's further amendments that are being debated and voted on tomorrow before we get to the third reading. So let's see what happens over the course of the next day.
You're taking a very sort of conciliatory sort of tone here. Look, it's a great bill, you know, you like a lot of it, you know, the Prime Minister's doing a good job, etc., etc. But you know what it would mean if you did vote against the Rwanda legislation. You know what that would mean for the authority of the Prime Minister. It would be shot. Are you prepared to do that?
Well, as I say, let's wait and see. What I don't accept is that if this bill were to fall, that's the end of the Rwanda policy. We all support what the Prime Minister is trying to do. He has got the right idea here, and he really is committed to making it work. We just disagree on the detail. If the bill were to fall, there is still the opportunity in the course of the Parliament to bring forward a bill that would work. So this isn't last chance saloon for Rwanda. I do think we should be making a bill that works. We won't be forgiven by the public for failing again. We've made an absolute promise that we're going to stop the vote, and the only way to do that is to have an effective deterrent whereby if you arrive here illegally, you will be swiftly detained and removed, and that further claims against your removal need to be made once you've got to another safe country. That's what the policy is, and we are determined to try and make sure that that's what actually happens.
It's interesting you say there that you won't be forgiven by the public if you don't make this work. I mean, it's effectively the same thing that the two deputy chairs said in their resignation letter, Lee Anderson and Brendan Clark-Smith. Was it right that they were sacked after backing that amendment?
Well, I think there is quite a strong convention whereby if you break the whip, if you've got a government job or a senior party job as chairman or deputy chairman, then that's not consistent with breaking the whip. So I think the government didn't have much of a choice. That said, I hope they'll come back soon. We need to unite as a party. I really recognise this is very painful for all of us. We want to stand on a united Conservative ticket. I appreciate many of our colleagues disapprove of what we're doing because they recognise we're having stories like this about Conservative Party disunity. It's no fun at all, and I want us all to unite, but we need to unite on ground that the public will support. They overwhelmingly expect us to pass a bill that works. They overwhelmingly think people who arrive here illegally should be detained without the right of appeal, except once they've been removed, which is what we're trying to achieve. So we all need to get back on the same page, and I hope that Lee and Brendan will be invited back into the government once we've got a policy position that we can all support.
And just finally, our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, just said that this is an extraordinary act of self-harm by the Conservative Party in an election year. And you know, looking at the warring five families, it's hard to disagree, isn't it?
Well, I heard that, and I rather object because, you know, we're not just playing politics here. Our job is not to put our party first. We're putting our country first. We think that we were elected on a mandate to take back control of our borders. The overwhelming majority of the country expect us to achieve control of migration. What, as I said, we need to do is to unite in a place that the government, that the party as a whole, the public, can support. It's really painful to have a temporarily disunited party, but I want us to get back onto the same page, be singing from the same hymn sheet when it comes to the election, but that needs to be a hymn that the public wants to hear.
OK, thank you so much for taking the time to come and speak to us this evening. Danny Krieger there.
Pleasure. OK, thanks.
Well, I've got to go back to Sam after that, haven't I? He wasn't very happy with what you said.
They often aren't. Danny Krieger was fascinating because he is trying to play down the level of policy difference between his rebels, the 60, and the Prime Minister. But the vote that caused the big rebellion was about stopping the application entirely of international law. There is no middle ground on that. Krieger was talking about finding some kind of way through. You can't have a sort of grey on that. It's black or it's white. So for all the talk of consensus, the interview just there was highly significant because he didn't suggest a way through. He just said, do what I say. You're
either pregnant or you're not, basically. Sam, thank you very much indeed. Well, let's bring in our duo for the night. shall we? And what a night it's been. We are joined by Guto Harri, the former Director of Communications to Boris Johnson in Downing Street, and also Josh Simons, who is the Director of Labour Together. Guto, you've seen a few Conservative rebellions in your time. Where would you put this one?
Well, last time we were together, I thought that, having looked over the precipice, they're all going to go home for Christmas, take a chill pill, and come back having just dusted themselves down and realised that the clock is ticking loudly now towards a general election. And the public hate disunited parties. It's one of the guaranteed rules of politics. And yet what you see is, as they're heading towards the cliff, instead of changing direction, some of them want to put their foot even more firmly on the accelerator and go flying off that cliff in a blaze of glory. I have to say, I'd be less polite than Sam. I think these are self-centred narcissists who are enjoying the attention that they command, not realising that their rebellion today is utterly futile, because they've been outvoted massively in the House of Commons. Tomorrow they either bottle it or they really are committing mass suicide as a party. So the futility of it, the self-indulgence of it, the narcissism of it, in aid of what? And what has happened is these people are so obsessed with ideological or even theological purity, they've forgotten that there's no point having the perfect policy if you're not in a position to execute it.
Boris Johnson says that you should vote against it. Is he wrong then?
He's no longer there. So his views are, as these people's views will be at this rate, largely irrelevant. It's great to sort of be able to sort of contribute to the debate. But there's a huge difference between being ideologically pure in opposition and being relevant in power. And these people are already acting as if they are not in power, and they're missing the big picture.
Josh, you speak a lot to those around Keir Starmer. How is the Leader's Office going to be reacting to the events of this evening?
Well, I mean, the serious point here is that, as Guto said, they are literally now in government but not in power. You know, they're not just behaving as if they're in opposition right now. They're not doing anything. They can't get planes off the ground. They can't get bills through Parliament. They certainly can't stop the boats. And, you know, Danny Kruger's, it's just disingenuous, a lot of what he said, because he's saying it's about the detail, but it's not. It's about fundamental principles, such as, do you want to respect the rule of law in this country such that individuals who have a legal right of appeal sustain that right of individual appeal? It's about a principle like, if we sign an international treaty, do we think in our domestic law that we should respect that international treaty? Now, if the Conservative Party cannot unite around its views on fundamental questions of principle like that, then of course it cannot govern and it should not even be in power.
We'll have lots more from you both throughout the programme, but in the meantime, we can go back to Central Lobby and we can speak to Sir John Hayes, who is the MP for South Holland and the Deepings, one of the rebels, also a close ally of the former Home Secretary, Suella Braverman. Thank you very much for being with us. Why did you decide to back the amendments tonight?
Well, because we've got to get this bill right. Illegal immigration is a crisis. We've never had hundreds of thousands of people crossing the channel in the way we have over the last few years, 120,000, I think, if you look at the figures. And so, because it's a crisis, it requires firm action and decisive policy. And to get the bill right means affecting what the Prime Minister promised, and that's to stop the votes. We want to help them do that by making this bill as tough as it needs to be.
So, if it's not amended, will you vote against it?
Well, that's a question for another time.
Come on, it's a question for now. We want to know. We want to know it now.
No. Well, you may want to know it now, but the point is, there's more debate tomorrow. The government still has a chance to accept what we've been arguing, that the bill needs to be tighter, needs to be tougher, and I hope they will. And the numbers tonight spoke for themselves, didn't they? A very large number of Conservative MPs who stuck to their guns, who stuck to their principles, who said they want to do the right thing by the British people.
Now, I just want to put to you what Guto Harri just said to us a moment before. He described you and other people who voted for these amendments as self-centred narcissists who are behaving in an utterly futile, who are committing mass suicide on behalf of the party in pursuit of something that's utterly futile. What would you say to that?
Well, let me tell you what I've learned over my 40, 50 years in politics. I began when I was a child, actually. And that is that people, the public that is, admire principle. There are my people who stick to their guns, who believe in what they say and say what they believe. And what they dislike most is people who say one thing one day and something else another. What they're against is people who don't stick to what they promise. Now, we promised to tackle... Do you want to ask that again? Sorry, I've got someone interfering with my microphone.
Apologies. You were talking there about how principle is really important. So let's just talk about the principle of the bill. If international law were to apply to the Rwanda policy, would you ever support it?
Well, there's always a balance to be struck between our obligations through treaties and statutes here in Parliament. Parliament is legitimate because people elect us and we're accountable to them. And when the government pledges, as it did in its manifesto, it will tackle illegal immigration in the way this bill sets out, then it has to see that through. But the bill has to do what it promises. It has to fulfil the pledge. And what we're trying to do is to make sure it is effective and we can indeed stop the votes.
Can I ask you a cheeky question to end?
You can ask me any question.
Who's your money on for the next Conservative leader? Suella Braverman or Robert Jenrick?
I'm not going to speculate about what might happen at some time in the future. You know, I told you I've been in politics a long time. One of the things I learned in politics, never answer what-if questions. We've got a long way to go. We're going to fight an election. I hope we can win that election and secure another Conservative victory.
OK, thank you very much indeed. John Hayes there speaking to us a little bit earlier. Well, let's go back to our duo for tonight. Guto Harri, the former Director of Communications to Boris Johnson in Downing Street, and Josh Simons, the Director of Labour Together. Wasn't very happy with you, was he?
Well, I thought he might have been a bit rougher, but on the very point he makes, people do admire principle. People admire a principled stand. But I remember Tony Blair, a man who won more elections than most, and for the Labour Party, who historically have failed to get into power, when he was getting them to ditch Clause 4, something that meant an awful lot to them at the time, he said, power without principle is barren, but principle without power is futile. And he was saying that in order to try and shake a party that had been out of power for most of the last century to do what it takes to get into power so that they are relevant. And this is a party that is behaving again tonight, I fear, despite the great memory that some distinguished rebels have. A lot of them behaving as if they don't realise how unbelievably horrific being in opposition is, where their views won't matter at all. They'll have no influence at all.
About the horrors of
horrible.
opposition.
And they've forgotten how bad it is, or they just don't know how bad it is. It's terrible.
As we've been talking, just had a bit of breaking news to bring you, because Jane Stevenson has resigned as PPS. She's tweeted to say, I've offered my resignation as a PPS parliamentary secretary. That's the kind of lowest rung on the ladder, if you like. I don't consider my votes to have been anti-government, but they do warrant resignation. In the chamber earlier, I paid tribute to Rishi Sunak's work so far and welcomed his commitment made in Rome in December to lead talks on the global frameworks. Jane Stevenson there resigning as a PPS. You were nodding there about the how terrible opposition is.
Well, opposition is the worst thing in politics. And the contrast, at the moment just couldn't be sharper. There's a Labour Party that's completely transformed itself and is hungry to govern so that it can change, and it's willing to think very carefully about where it's out of step with the public, have difficult conversations internally to make sure that it's, united in what it's presenting to the public. But the crazy thing about this moment is that if you step back and think about what is it the Tories are going to war over, what is the point of this policy and what is it likely to achieve, you are reminded that it is a complete waste of time to expend your political capital, your divided party, over this. If it works, it's sending a low hundreds number to Rwanda. That's low hundreds out of 30,000-ish that come over on small boats. The argument that that is going to really present some kind of meaningful deterrent is weak at best.
But they don't. I mean, what the Conservatives would say is they don't know yet. You don't know if it's going to work as a deterrent or not until you try it. And what they've tried so far, none of it has worked.
But that's a bit like saying you don't know how, massive the cliff is until you jump off it. Of course, it's true that you don't know, but it's not that hard to work out that 400 people, say, as a proportion of 30,000 is not that high. And given the sorts of circumstances you're fleeing, you'd take a gamble of not being one of the 400 out of 30. But the key thing is, given the probability that it might not work very well, why would you destroy your party and your chance of governing over this?
So I think the policy could work. I was based in Italy where Berlusconi did something similar. If you crossed over to Lampedusa, an island of Sicily, you ended up in Libya. Funny enough, the message got back, the boat stopped coming. So if you do it properly, I can see that it works. Rishi Sunak, if he were here, would tell you that he's confident this can work. But what his own MPs are doing is preempting the courts. They've decided that as currently drawn, despite the government's lawyers largely sort of thinking it's got a decent fighting chance of getting there, they're saying, no, we're going to preempt the courts. You don't need the courts to shoot this down. We'll shoot it down as a policy. When did that ever happen? When was that ever a good idea? And I'll tell you the last time the party was this theological, it was over Europe when John Major was Prime Minister. And they argued over things that none of them ever got to influence for the next 2 decades. And if they just went back tonight and read their history and then come back tomorrow and decide not to go charging off the cliff, then they've still got a fighting chance as a party in the general election. If they carry on like this, might as well pack it up now.
I thought it was really interesting when you talk about the discipline of Labour at the minute, because it does feel that there is a huge contrast there to be drawn.
Yeah, I mean, Labour understand that we've spent now, a painful 13 years, 14 years in opposition and have got nothing done. That's what it means to be in opposition, is that you get nothing done. We were talking earlier, the only reason why the public are interested in these backbenchers who have their moment of glory being interviewed by you for a couple of minutes and ask some hard questions, the only reason why we all care is because their party's in power. As soon as they're out of power, nobody will be interested in a 2-minute interview segment with them. And that's been the Labour Party's experience now for 14 years. And if that means having difficult policy conversations that are about hard principles, rule of law, sovereignty, international treaties, these really fundamental questions, if it means having those conversations in private, then that's the price you pay for being a serious governing party. And Labour, that runs through Labour's blood right now. That's all we do.
I'll tell you the thing that really gets me is if this energy, if this commitment, if this drive, if this conspiring was directed towards why can't people in large parts of the country register with a dentist? Why can't they see their GP? Why do a lot of people feel uncomfortable when their kids are walking home because the streets don't feel safe? If they cared about that so much and exerted the pressure to get things done about that, and to sing the praises of what they have got right as a government and to seize the opportunities that are there for modern Britain, then I think the public would wake up and say, God, that person is on the same planet that I'm on. But even though small boats matters to some people, it is a tiny, tiny fraction in the number of people who come here as migrants from abroad. And it's a tiny, tiny part of the policy agenda that will matter in most households when they're deciding who should be running Britain for the next 5 years.
Thanks both very much. Very lively discussion. Passions high on the panel tonight, I think I'm feeling. Now, of course, there's another whole wing of the Conservative Party that the Prime Minister is trying to keep happy as well. Damien Green, the senior Conservative MP, member of the One Nation Conservatives, joins us now from Central Lobby. Thank you so much for being with us. What did you make of the rebellion this evening?
I think that was the high watermark of it. I know from talking to some colleagues that there were a number of people who voted for one of the amendments knowing that they were going to be defeated, but who will row back behind the government on third reading tomorrow, which is the vote that really matters. So I think that, as I say, we've seen the high watermark of this rebellion.
It's interesting that you've spoken to people who say that, who basically are trying to send out a signal that, look, they're not really that happy with it, but you think that actually when push comes to shove, they'll hold their nose and they'll back the Prime Minister. Do you think it will pass third reading?
Yes, I do think it will pass third reading. And also, it's a rational approach for people to make. There are plenty of bills that pass this place where people will have reservations, but will think this is 80 or 90% of what I want to see. And rational people in those circumstances vote for that. rather than get nothing at all. So I think most of my colleagues are, I'm sure all of my colleagues are rational in their way, but most of them are extremely rational and will therefore vote for a bill that moves the dial in the direction they want it moved.
All of your colleagues are rational in their own way.
That's my phrase for the evening.
I'm going to push you a little bit more on that, I think. What goes through your mind when, you're staring into the abyss election-wise? If the polls are anything near right, a whole load of Conservatives are going to lose their seats, and you're locked in this civil war, you're whipping each other apart, the key legislation is at the risk of not getting through at all. What goes through your mind?
Mostly, please don't. But people, can take their own choice and vote the way they want. It's a democratic country. But I think that. I think the world will look at a different place in 24 hours' time, and we all get very feverish on nights like this. But in the end, I think that the vote will go through. I think third reading will pass, and I think that therefore by this time tomorrow night, the government will look a lot stronger on this issue, and will then actually maybe be able to move back into the real world and actually make sure that we get it through the House of Lords and it goes onto the statute book, and then maybe we can see some flights get off and we can have Rwanda as a deterrent to the criminal gangs who are bringing people across the channel. In the end, this is all about stopping the boats, and so therefore I think by tomorrow we will have taken a significant step forward to doing that.
If the bill is toughened up along the lines that the Rebel amendments would like to see, so limiting asylum seekers' ability to appeal, disapplying international law to parts of it, if that does happen, could you still vote for the legislation?
Well, no. I mean, we've said that if it breaks international law, then I wouldn't vote for it, nor would very many of my colleagues. But I don't think that will happen. And it shouldn't happen for the very practical reason that the Rwandans have said that they are not going to take part in the scheme if it breaks international law. So passing legislation that did that would make sure that the legislation was pointless. So to those of my colleagues who say we're strengthening the legislation, no, they're not. They're weakening it. They're rendering it pointless. And so I think that the government gets that, and that's why I think the government won't accept, haven't accepted any of the amendments that have been put forward to do that.
OK. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us this evening, Damian Green, there. Quick thought from our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates.
Two fascinating things that, with the greatest of respect to Damian Green, he just doesn't know. The first is he asserts that the third reading vote, the all-important one, is tomorrow. We do not know that yet. Will it go ahead? Secondly, he's saying the bill will pass. It will be fine if the government go ahead and hold that vote, because he thinks lots of the rebels will climb down and not vote against it. The whole argument of the One Nation wing, the moderate wing of the Conservative Party tonight, is call their bluff, call their bluff, call their bluff. God, I wonder what it looks like in Downing Street right now.
Me too. Right, let's talk to one of the rebels, shall we? Let's speak to the Conservative MP, Miriam Cates. She's co-chair of the new Conservative group. We just spoke to Damian Green, who said that he is very, very confident that the bill will get through, that he effectively wants to see the bluff called of the rebels. Is he right?
Well, we've just had the votes on two of our amendments. I think we had 70 vote for the cash amendment. So there's clearly a strong feeling amongst a number of people in our party who want this bill toughened up. And let's remember why we want it toughened up. It's just because we want it to work. The Prime Minister has said that he will stop the boats, he will do whatever it takes. And our concern with the bill as drafted, we absolutely support the aims of the bill, but our concern with the bill as drafted is that there are loopholes in it which will allow multiple claims, multiple individual claims to be brought in in the domestic courts and potentially claims from the European courts as well that would just tie the whole plan up in the courts again, removing any potential deterrent effect. Now, passing a bill that doesn't work is in nobody's interest. It's not in the Prime Minister's interest, it's not in the party's interest, it's not in the One Nation group's interest, it's certainly not in our constituents' interest. So we want the bill to work. That's why we've put forward these amendments. We've got respectable legal arguments for all the amendments, which is what the Prime Minister's test was. So we very much hope that the Prime Minister will see the strength of feeling and accept our amendments or put forward his own equivalent ones.
If it's not toughened up, will you vote against the bill?
Well, I'm prepared to, but obviously I can only speak for myself. But 24 hours is a long time in politics. We've got a whole day of debating left to come.
Can I just jump in if I can?
We've got more votes to come.
Because you say, I'm prepared to. That's exactly the same phrase that Danny Kruger used before as well. What does that mean? Does that mean you will vote against the legislation?
I'm prepared to consider doing that in principle, but as I'm sure you'll appreciate, we've got a whole day of debating to go tomorrow. More votes, not just on our amendments, votes on other people's amendments as well. So we're just not in a position to say yet what the bill will look like this time tomorrow. And also, as I said, we very much hope the government will reach out and concede our amendments. And I just caught the last part of the interview with Damien Green just then about the international law arguments. And I think it's really important to make clear that the bill already says on the face of it that the government says it may not be compliant with the European Convention of Human Rights. It says that on the face of the bill. And the Rwandan government have accepted the bill as it is. So it's not the case that if there's a threat that the bill may not comply with certain conventions, it will be thrown out, because it hasn't been. And all our amendments will do is strengthen the bill in line with that confession on the front of the bill, as the government has said. So it's not the case that our amendments break international law.
We were speaking to Guto Harri a bit earlier today. He described the rebels as self-centred narcissists who've effectively forgotten what opposition is like and that you should all pull together. What's your reaction to that?
Well, if we don't stop the votes, we certainly will be in opposition. I think that's absolutely true. But if you look at the polling on this issue, if you look at a poll that was published just last night, it showed that in the vast majority of UK constituencies, the preferred option for dealing with this issue is swift detention and deportation. That is the public's preferred option when they were given the range of options on this bill. And of course that's true, because ordinary people do not lie awake at night worrying about our standing amongst international elite lawyers. They worry about security and crime and the cost of housing, all the kinds of things that both legal and illegal immigration put pressure on. It's very clear that the public want us to sort this out, and we will be toast if we don't.
Do you think that the two Deputy Chair, Brendan Clark-Smith and Lee Anderson, who resigned, do you think it was right that they effectively had to leave their positions in order to vote against it? Or would you have liked to have seen a place where they could have kept their jobs?
No, I think it was the honourable thing for them to do, to resign before voting for the amendments and against the government.
OK, thank you very much indeed. Miriam Cates there. Well, it's been a very busy politics hub, a pretty solid rebellion against the government's position on Rwanda. Coming up, we have more reaction on tonight's votes with our duo for the evening, plus the UK's election map is changing. We'll tell you why it matters. That's next.
Obviously, with New Year's resolutions and everything, I think there's the hardest part for people when it comes to like diet and dry January. When it comes around this time, that's when people really start to struggle and think, can I really go through the whole month? So reading the articles I've read now about Blue Monday, I think the biggest challenges are people working, in jobs, struggling financially, and then that post-Christmas slump of, oh, I'm not feeling very merry, you're not really around family that you may have been around Christmas. And so I can understand why people might go through it. I haven't really experienced it myself. I feel good.
You've done Dry January before, haven't you?
I have. I did it last year. So when I did Dry January last year, it was for a campaign for water aid. So it was more on the focus of more water rather than actually cutting out alcohol. So I actually cut out coffee, tea, fizzy drinks, juice. And I was drinking just water to promote, how important.
You were a lot of fun, weren't you?
I'm always fun.
I'm sure that's true, actually.
Just to promote how good water is. So yeah, Dry January, from what I've heard from my friends who are doing it this year, I think they're really struggling with the terms of just situational, or me, I'm a big sports person. So, the playoffs are happening and people watching games at the pub, you're just, inclined to have a drink with your mates and you just can't, you're drinking water and people are like, come on, just have one. It's just one, mate. I think that kind of pressure and stress is why a lot of people fail dry January. The price of low alcohol and non-alcoholic drinks is actually going up, which is good because it's said to favour people who are more heavy drinkers, and they're going for, alcohol-free gin and alcohol-free beer and other drinks, which is great. I haven't actually tried it myself, but apparently they taste exactly the same. But obviously the medical benefits that we know as doctors are you don't have the short-term and long-term negative effects of alcohol consumption. As you mentioned, the issue is the socioeconomically less developed groups are the groups who are at higher risk of a poor prognosis from alcohol-related disease, chronically and acutely. And so if they can't afford these alcohol-free drinks, they're going to go for the cheaper alternative, which is to have the alcohol, and that's what we're trying to steer them away from. You're almost defeating the aim if you can't access the demographics that you're actually trying to target.
Hello, welcome back. Well, let's take stock, shall we now, with our duo for the evening, Guto and Josh. Well, I guess the million-dollar question that I'm trying to work out is, look, this is a big rebellion. They're going to be worried in number 10. But is this going to translate into people voting down the Rwanda Bill or not? It feels like that's a million-dollar question. Josh?
Well, Guto's the man for the inside knowledge on the Conservative Party, but put it this way, I think that these sort of day-by-day mad evenings where, we're sat watching late-night Rwanda votes, I don't think the public follow the kind of blow-by-blow, moment-by-moment, who's up, who's down, who's resigned, who doesn't. What they do is they get the sort of general sense that this lot are not governing. Miriam talked about polling and the public's priorities right now. We at Labour Together do a lot of polling on what those priorities are, and they are the economy, and in particular, cost of living. They are the NHS, and in particular, waiting lists. They are immigration. And on any of those things, what the public do not see is a united government doing anything about them, frankly. And so what I think happens in these evenings is, regardless of what happens, the chit-chat in the bubble now is, if the government passed the vote, then suddenly they'll look really strong and stable. Nonsense. I don't think it makes any difference. I think what the public see is a government that are disunited and are just not talking about the fundamental priorities that they have. And that puts them in contrast, when they start to tune in to the sorts of things that the Labour Party are saying, and they are talking about NHS waiting lists, they are talking about the cost of living, they think, actually, this government is just not doing anything about the things that I care about.
Guto?
Well, when I was in number 10, I was surprised to discover that more often than not, the party managers, the whips, would advise that the party won't buy it. And so there were many decisions where, and Boris Johnson had big overriding issues at the time, but he was told all the time, no, you can't do that, you can't do that. So your room for manoeuvre gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And at some point, you've got to decide whether you want to be in number 10 if you can't get anything done. And so this is one of those tomorrow. There will be people in the room, some of them same people, who will say, do you know what, the party feels very strong, you can't do that. They'll be really upset. And I think it's time for Rishi Sunak to basically say, but there's no point otherwise. And just say, no, we're going to go ahead and challenge them. And if they, if they don't like the policy as it is, they'll end up with no policy. They'll end up with no Rwanda. They'll end up possibly triggering a whole sequence of events that means no power, no government. And so this is a moment where he's really got to hold his nerve, I think, and face them down tomorrow.
You see, I sort of started off, I saw those numbers, 68 voting for the cash amendment, 58 voting for the general amendment. I was like, oh, wow, the government really is in trouble tomorrow now. That's a lot of MPs. If just a fraction of those Conservative MPs vote against third reading, well, it might not be tomorrow, but third reading, then it's not going to get through. But then, you hear Danny Kruger saying, I am prepared to vote against the legislation. Then you hear Miriam Kate saying exactly the same thing. I'm prepared to vote. If you're on picket, she's like, I'm prepared to consider voting against it. Then you start thinking, hang on a minute.
You've rather brilliantly exposed the fact that they're all they've got a script as well, and they're coordinated. and that they're not saying, yes, this is something I'll die in a ditch for. So for all this talk of high principle, that high principle will be forgotten tomorrow when they realise that it's, you know, it's all over, or they settle for this thing. And then the futility of tonight is even more bonkers.
Right.
And I think you've exposed that tonight with all of them.
And I think that begs the question, why are they doing it? If they're not actually going to back up their threat with a vote tomorrow or whenever third reading is, why are they doing it? You know, because it doesn't make any sense in terms of presenting as a united government to the electorate, of showing that you care about the issues. And the only answer that I can come up with that's plausible is they're not even thinking about the next election. They're not even taking the public seriously. They're thinking about the Conservative internal battle for the future of the party that will happen if the Conservative Party lose the next general election.
After conversations today, I think the chance of people moving on Rishi Sunak is a little bit underpriced at the moment. I want to know from both of you, what do you think the odds are of another vote of no confidence in Rishi, this time in Rishi Sunak? Every Prime Minister must have one. Guto?
I will share with you that a former minister did ask me just before Christmas, do you think your old boss could be persuaded to stand in this by-election that has been...
Boris Johnson, in case anyone's wondering.
And would Boris come back in a by-election and stand again? And I said, don't start. I think if he was in the House of Commons at the moment, it would be feverish. It would be, you know, possibly the ultimate drama. But he's not. And surely... after all the self-harm, 5 Prime Ministers in 6 years, 4 in 4, you know, even the Conservative Party at the moment, deluded as many members seem to be, sadly, they don't think they can pull that off again.
Josh?
The thing to me is that it's just like being in Groundhog Day. Oh, we're talking about Boris Johnson coming back again, and I know with a dismissal at the end, but, you know, here we are again. We have a Conservative Prime Minister who, whether or not he does in fact face another leadership challenge, he just does not have political authority to govern, you know, the United Kingdom. And that's happened repeatedly in the last few years, despite having a big majority. And in the meantime, we end up with this mad scramble for Boris Johnson coming back, Nadine Dorries doing the rounds, you know, pitch rolling for him. And I think the country just thinks, enough.
I'm fascinated by the fact you think that those odds are...
just creeping up a little.
Just creeping up a little. Watch this space. Coming up next on the Politics Hub. The UK's election map has been redrawn. Our very own Sam Coates is going to tell us why that matters. Hello, welcome back. Now, when the general election is called, likely sometime in the second half of this year, the constituency map is going to look a little bit different. And that's because of changes introduced to the boundaries. Our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, has been looking at what impact it could have on who gets the keys to number 10.
In December 2019, when Boris Johnson won the election with an 80-seat majority, politically, the country looked like this. Each one of these, of course, is a constituency, the colour of the party that won, lots of Tory blue in England and in Wales, lots of SNP yellow in Scotland. But since then, the very map that shapes our democracy has been redrawn. All but 77 of these seats have been changed in the first overhaul since 2010. Now, it's only a little line here and a small tweak there to ensure everybody's votes are more or less equal, but here it is. And it means more seats in England, fewer in Scotland and Wales. But the real difference is here on what it means. Now, this is the number of seats each party won last time, determining the makeup of our current House of Commons. But under the redrawn constituency boundaries, this would have been the estimated result. And what do we see? The Tories have more seats, 7 more, while Labour down 2, Liberal Democrats down 3. And how would that have changed the 2019 outcome? Look, at a stroke, the Tories would have won an even bigger majority compared to the previous boundaries, and Sir Keir Starmer has an even bigger mountain to climb if he wants to seize the crown from Rishi Sunak. Now, this is the first of Sky News' brand new swingometers. As someone once said, it's just a bit of fun because it presumes everyone in the UK acting in the same way and makes a lot of assumptions, but it's still a great tool for understanding what's going on. Now, this one looks at what happens if the number of people voting Tory goes up. Look, you can see the number of seats Rishi Sunak's party increases. But let's be honest, that's not what the polls, the betting markets and the MPs expect. The next election is all about Labour gains. So let's go through the key milestones. 0. Right, here we go. This is the status quo under the new boundaries. Now, if there is a 4.2 percentage point swing, the Tories lose 47 seats. And Rishi Sunak no longer has a majority. And that means he's all but certain to be out of number 10 because no opposition party will work with the Tories. This happens if there's a swing big enough to take Wrexham in North Wales. Sir Keir Starmer would make his claim to be Prime Minister, but it's a really unstable hung parliament, unless there's a swing of 8.3 percentage points and Labour win at least 81 seats. Each dot represents seats, meaning that they've overtaken the Tories as the largest party. They'd still be short of an overall majority, and they would need the Liberal Democrats or the SNP to govern. And this, a 12.7% swing, is what Labour needs to be able to govern alone, without any help at all. A majority, overall majority in the Commons of 2. But this needs 125 Labour gains. But let's just pause here for a moment to concentrate on this winning line. 12.7 percentage points for an overall majority of 2. So look at this. This is a bit historical. It's never happened before. The biggest ever swing to date was in 1945. You could see it here. It was a Labour landslide after the wartime coalition. But that was quite unusual. Blair's famous 1997 victory, well, that was a swing to Labour of 10.2 percentage points. So when you compare this to what Keir Starmer needs for a majority, you can see how big a task that is. Now, a majority of 30, well, that's a swing of 13.8 percentage points. And a majority of 50, well, that needs 14.5. It's worth saying currently the polls imply a swing of about 15 percentage points. Will that hold in a campaign? Now, the final seat that would fall on a swing needed for Labour to gain an overall majority is Buckingham and Bletchley. Here's what the voters there think.
I'd never go Labour because they're too much for what is wrong with this country.
Last time I voted for Conservatives, and I think all of us have been a bit disappointed, to say the least, about what's been going on.
They will give away money at voting time for the next election. That's a ploy, but by the same token, it keeps me sweet.
Do you know what? I really haven't got a clue because I think they're both as bad as each other.
So, of course, the battle between Labour and the Conservatives will be pivotal. But what's going on in Scotland will also determine who our next Prime Minister is. Now, here we need to look at the potential swing from the SNP to Labour. Now, keeping all the other parties the same, this is the last election result. Just one seat for Labour, 48 for the SNP. Now, Labour themselves have been suggesting that they could win 12 to 15 seats in Scotland. That would require a swing of 9.5 percentage points. An 11.1% swing would mean Labour overtaking the SNP to become the largest party. But since the 1950s, Labour hasn't formed a government with less than 40 seats in Scotland, which would require a huge 25.1 percentage point swing. And for what it's worth, current polls suggest one of around 10 to 12 percentage points from Labour to the SNP. Now, these are the sorts of seats that Labour needs to take from the Tories to get that majority. Maybe a little bit less if the SNP collapse in Scotland and if the Lib Dems do well in the south of England. But it's a lot, you can see it. Can Sir Keir Starmer pull it off?
You're watching the Politics Hub. Coming up, as this 10 Downing Street door goes under the hammer, we'll find out which former Prime Minister is reportedly interested in bidding. And we're also going to have a little quiz about it.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. Alex Crawford joining us now from Ukraine.
Their personal possessions are all scattered around the place.
Our economics and data editor, Ed Conway, try and make sense of the big numbers for us.
Things can change incredibly quickly, and that's what they have done.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Hello and welcome back to the Politics Hub. Now, given the manner of his departure from office, it's probably not surprising that Boris Johnson would be pining for a return to Downing Street. But if reports are to be believed, he's trying to relive the experience from the comfort of his own home, bidding for a life-size replica of the number 10 door that was featured in Netflix's The Crown. Amazing. Now that the show has come to an end, the production company is selling it off. It's expected to fetch around £30,000. Not bad going there at all. Well, political memorabilia goes on sale all the time, and you might be surprised to find out how much it goes for. So we thought maybe a good moment to test the knowledge of our panel with a bit of a quiz, a political memorabilia quiz. See if first you can tell us What the item actually is... Can you tell us what that is? It is a cigar.
Winston Churchill?
It is a cigar, and it is Winston Churchill's cigar. That is correct. So this is a cigar butt discarded by Winston Churchill, sold in 2021 for £4,270. That's a bargain, isn't it?
It's a lot of money back then. Still a lot of money for a cigar that's been chewed.
A butt as well, not even a whole cigar. Can't even smoke it. Not that you should do that, obviously, I should say, as well. Right, let's have a look at the next one, shall we? What is this? And
That's got to be Margaret Thatcher's handbag.
And how much do you think it went for then?
2015. Would have been in the 90s. 2015. Ooh.
60 grand? 100 grand?
Let's have a look. Margaret Thatcher's handbag.
Cheap.
£16,250. Bargain. I'm with you. I thought these would be going for much more than this. Mrs Thatcher photographed entering number 10 Downing Street with what appears to be that bag, also when visiting President Reagan. Right, let's have a look at the next one. What is this? It's a pipe.
Winston Churchill.
Is it?
Harold Wilson.
Harold Wilson, correct. Now, it was sold last year. Oh, these are all bargains. How much do you think it went for?
3,000.
300 quid.
£300. £300 over Harold Wilson's pipe.
They should have done it at a Labour Party auction.
And finally, look at this one. What are we looking at? Who's...
Was that JFK's assassination car? It's a bit dark.
It was indeed. It was JFK's presidential limousine. In 1963, he was assassinated while riding in a 1961 presidential limousine. How much do you think it went for?
Hundreds of thousands, maybe $1 million.
Let's have a look. It went for, in 2018, it sold for £375,000. Not bad going. We've got... not bad going at all. Thank you both very much for a very, very lively night of news. And what a night it's been. 6 amendments, moments of high drama in the House of Commons, and the feuding 5 families there for all to see. More drama than an EastEnders episode. I think the big question now, of course, is what happens when the bill comes back? Are they prepared to hold their noses and vote against the Prime Minister? And what does that mean for his authority? We'll be back tomorrow night.